All right, good morning, everybody. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Phil Koehler. This is our second installment of our new webinar series called Celebrating the Achievements of Innovators in Pest and Vector Control. And Dr. Koehler certainly is one of those people. So today, again, Dr. Koehler, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Claudia. I'll tell you what, this probably shouldn't be so much about me as much as it is about the people who have helped me over the years and mentored me, and also folks that worked with me. And I must admit that we'll mention a few of those names today, and I have to apologize for all the folks that I'm going to miss.
Right. A lot of people over your long career, right? And it still
Yes.
continues. And so this is really exciting. And, when I was coming up with some of the names and people to ask to be in this webinar series, you are frankly at the top of the list, right? So I know I went to University of Florida, spent a lot of time with you, and have spent a lot of time over the years learning at all the different things that you've done for this industry. So I know everyone is very appreciative of the impact that you've had. So I think this is just a great opportunity for folks to know you a little better, right? And where you came from and all the different things that you've done.
They might not like what they learned.
I think they will.
You never know.
I think they will. So, right, so we're going to get started here. So here's actually we have some slides that we put together showing the past and different projects. And I believe that's you and Dr. Pereira in front of the Urban Entomology building.
Right. Roberto has been with me for almost 15 years. And I must admit that he's been a tremendous help in working with me and helping out many of the students that we've had during the past 15 years.
That's wonderful. So tell me, Dr. Koehler, where'd you grow up?
Okay, I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, and you wouldn't know it by my last name, but that's a German part of the country. And my last name is actually an O with an umlaut instead of an OE. So when it was Americanized, they put an OE in. Other parts of the same family came over and they only put an O in.
Okay.
So it's actually an O umlaut, Koehler, and it's kind of halfway between Koehler and Koehler. So it's kind of mixed. Southeastern Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania Dutch country, and it is a very conservative part of the country. My father was a minister in the Reformed Church that then became evangelical and Reformed, and then became United Church of Christ, which was a very liberal church in the end. So there was quite a bit of change over time. But I grew up in that part of it. My grandmother on my father's side did a searching into the background on the Koehler part that came over, and probably they came over from the Black Forest in Germany and were charcoal burners. So that's what the last name means, charcoal burners. And evidently part of the family came over in 1702 and bought their farm from William Penn and his agents. So it's a long-standing part. I think on my mother's side, it's a younger part, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a carpenter for the railroad. You wouldn't think that carpenters would be associated with the railroad, but they had wooden rail crossings. The crossing bars that came down to prevent people from going onto the tracks. All those were wooden. So he was someone that worked for the railroad and repairing that. And then my grandmother on that side, she had a little restaurant that she ran out of her house. They lived very close to the railroad, and so the railroad workers would come there for breakfast before they go to work.
Interesting.
So it was kind of interesting that my father and my mother grew up together in Quakertown, which is a very conservative part of the country.
Definitely. So I see a photograph of you here. How old do you think you were at that time?
Yeah, so I was probably in third or fourth grade. It was before I started wearing glasses, which I think was in the fourth grade.
And so do you have siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister, and and two younger brothers.
Mhm.
Now, there's quite a gap between me being born and my two younger brothers, but my sister and I were about 2 years apart.
Okay.
And she is, or she was, she's retired now, but she was in charge of a guardian ad litem program where she would represent children that are going through court proceedings and have a bad family background.
Wow,
So
that's
she would
wonderful.
represent them in court legally. And then my next youngest brother owned an ice cream store.
That's great.
He graduated from the same college I did, Catawba College, but he went through in business, and he wanted to own an ice cream store, and he got with one of the members of my father's congregation who owned an ice cream store, and he figured out how to do it. He would make ice cream in the morning and run the shop in the afternoon,
Wow.
and his wife would sell ice cream all evening long. So it was quite a rigorous program for them.
And this was in Pennsylvania?
No, he did that in Lexington, Virginia,
Okay.
where he had his ice cream store.
Nice.
And then my youngest brother, then he was a researcher for SmithKline Beecham,
Okay.
and he was in charge of ultra bright marketing for many years. He went through college in Pennsylvania, and he majored in psychology for his master's degree out of Pittsburgh, and he ended up being a research leader for marketing for SmithKline Beecham. Eventually, he interviewed for the directorship of research for SmithKline Beecham over in London and didn't get the job, but he eventually retired early too. So my two brothers retired at a much younger age than I did.
Yeah, good business sense, I think. Huh?
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah. So another thing is that I spent my formative years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that's where is Amish country. And you see, I have an Amish buggy there.
Yeah.
And there were Mennonites there and Amish. The Amish went to their own schools. My school had mostly Mennonites, where the girls would go to school in their prayer caps.
Yeah.
and you don't think about it, but especially down here in the South, you don't have the same kind of approach. It's very liberal compared to the background that I have.
Definitely. So I think as a young kid, I think we were talking that you started working pretty young, right?
Yeah, I started working pretty young, and my first job was at McDonald's, and that's actually the McDonald's that I worked at.
Wow.
The picture was taken in the 1960s with the old cars out there. You can see one car there on the left.
Yeah.
It's kind of a vintage now, but it was a new thing back then. McDonald's was actually started somewhere around 1956 in Chicago, and this was a franchise that I worked at. It was the largest franchise in New England. When we had lunch rush on Sundays, the line for waiting for hamburgers would go around the restaurant 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
I mean, there were hundreds of people. It's kind of like Buc-ee's now.
It definitely must have been a novelty, right?
There are hundreds of people there. Well, there were hundreds of people there at McDonald's, and the idea was you could get a whole meal for 37 cents. So a hamburger was 15 cents, a French fry was 12 cents, and a Coke was 10 cents. So 37 cents bought you a whole meal.
So you started really at the very beginning when it was of the franchise in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So I guess, that was for school, you paid for school, but the question I have is, what did you work the fries? Did you work milkshakes, or did you do it all?
Well, the first place that I started, the first job that I had when I started there, was trash in the parking lot.
All right, so that's
you
good.
start right at the bottom.
Yeah.
I started at $1 an hour and ended up at like $1.25 an hour.
Yeah.
So, and I worked there for 3 years.
Yeah.
And my older sister went to college, and my father always said, a girl can't get much much pay,
Mhm.
whereas a boy can. So you're going to have to pretty well pay your way because we're going to have to pay her way. And I have to say, my father was a minister, and the most he ever earned in a year was like $12,000 to $15,000 in a year. And so our family didn't have a whole lot of money, so I had to work in order to pay my way through school. So McDonald's did that for
That's
me.
great.
And I must admit that I would work 20 hours, uh, 20 hours a week during school, and then 40 hours a week during the summertime. So, so I was staying busy, working either hamburgers or fries or the window and selling stuff. And I must admit that I became very good at cooking the hamburgers, doing the fries, selling at the window.
Yeah.
And, they would have competitions on who could sell the most because it was more, how fast can you get the stuff for the people and get their money and give them their change and get them gone.
Well, clearly, I mean, I think this teaches a lot of good work ethic and working hard, and, that sounds just wonderful.
Yeah, I did. At the end, the owner of the franchise, Larry Arnold, he offered me a new restaurant that he was opening up to be part of the franchise. The people that took him up on that, which I didn't, the people that took him up on that became multimillionaires.
Really did pretty well.
By the time I graduated from college, I said, no, I want to get an education. I don't want to own a restaurant, which was my mistake.
Really rethinking that these years, maybe? No, it's all good. So you went to school in North Carolina, right?
Yes, I went to Catawba College in North Carolina. It's a school of about 1,000 students.
Okay.
And it's still about a school of about 1,000 students, so it's not large, but it was a church-related school. And the reason I chose that was I could get a assistance for tuition. They pretty well covered my tuition with a scholarship there.
Fantastic.
And that way, all I had to do was pay for my room and board out of my McDonald's money. So it was a very good place to go to school. It's a small liberal arts school. And when I told my kids that they should go there, they go, that's like a community college. We don't want to go there. But I found that it was not a bad education.
Did the
really
job,
was quite good.
Clearly.
And when I took I was a biology major there, and I had the choice of a number of different fields, but I really enjoyed the biology. My father never understood that very much, why I would choose biology over things that would be more direct in helping people. But I really enjoyed the biology part. And I must admit, when I took the biology GRE exams, I was in the 95th, 94th, 95th percentile.
Somehow, Dr. Koehler, that doesn't shock me, right?
I was completely enthralled with biology and just wanted to learn everything that I could, and evidently learned enough to be able to go on.
Very grateful for that, for sure.
Yeah.
And so it looks like you were able to get some NSF fellowships.
Yeah, so I actually had 3 NSF fellowships during my time at Catawba College, which is amazing for a small school.
And quite impressive for an undergraduate, right?
Well, we had one of the scientists from Oak Ridge National Lab, Gordon Blaylock, come in and give a lecture to the students. And I talked to him after his lecture and said, this really sounds fascinating, because he was working on chromosome aberrations that are caused by radiation. So that was his specialty. And by getting to know him then, he was able to get me the first NSF fellowships there with Oak Ridge National Labs. They have a part of Oak Ridge National Labs, which is to bring in students and give them research experience. So I went there for 2 summers, actually. The first NSF fellowship, I worked for him. And what we did was we would go out into a lake that was created to hold back the radioactive waste from what was,
Mhm.
they produced the atomic bombs there at Oak Ridge. So they had atomic reactors, they had radioactive waste. They put it in 55-gallon drums, buried it in a hillside back in the 1940s. And those had rusted through by the 1960s when I was there. And then they built a lake to let the sediments of the radioactive waste go out. And there were midges that lived in that radioactive waste. And so I'd go out there, collect the midges, and then look at their chromosomes in their salivary glands, because they have very large chromosomes in their salivary glands. I would look at those for aberrations. And I did that for 2 summers. And then the other NSF fellowship that I had was with Argonne National Lab, which is south of Chicago. Yep. And is where the first atomic reactions occurred. You know, Fermi did his atomic reactions there at the University of Chicago, and they built Argonne National Lab because of that. I did not enjoy that one very much because I was in radiological physics, and I found out exactly what I didn't want to do in life.
It was radiological physics, Dr. Koehler.
No, radiological physics and me did not get along very well. I was doing neutron activation and gamma ray spectroscopy. When you burn a substance with neutrons, it produces radioactive materials that, as it decays, it gives off frequencies of gamma rays that are related to the element that they come from. So we were actually doing trace element pollution in fish of the Great Lakes, but it was all related to that neutron activation and the gamma ray spectroscopy. When I would get the samples in, which would be usually liver samples from the fish, they would have 2 people, they were coming back from the neutron reactor, and then I would have to separate the stuff on a column, and they would have 2 people with Geiger counters on either side because the stuff was so hot. So,
yikes.
And I must admit, I didn't enjoy that at all.
So in your undergrad, did you take any entomology courses, or when was your first exposure to entomology?
Yes, my first entomology course was with Jay Buxton, who used to be he was there as a department chair at Catawba, but he used to be an entomologist with Clemson University, and before that with Texas A&M. So he was a very good entomologist. My first entomology course was with him. And I think I had something like 189 families in my first collection.
That's it, Dr. Koehler. That's it, right?
Which was unbelievable.
Yes, we hear lots of students complaining, right? Look, from now on, nobody should be complaining if you're able to get those kinds of.
Yeah, I had lunch with him when I was in the Navy several years. Actually, I was on the faculty at UF when I had lunch with him at one of the Entomological Society meetings. And he said he still pulled out some of the things that I did as an undergraduate when students would come in and complain that they didn't have the facilities to be able to do research there. Yeah. He would show them my stuff and say, you can get it done if you want.
So under your undergraduate, I do want to make a point here that you were able to publish in the American Naturalist, right, as an undergrad with some of the work that you did, which is really just spectacular.
Yeah, the American Naturalist, for those of you that are used to publishing in scientific publications, it is a very hard journal to get into. And so my first one was as an undergraduate with the chromosomal aberrations out of Oak Ridge. Some of that information got into American Naturalist. So I was very fortunate, and it probably led the way to me being able to get into grad school.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about, then you went to Cornell, right, in 1969, from 69 to 72. So 3 years undergrad or graduate school?
3 years of graduate school, and I bypassed my master's degree and got my PhD from Cornell. But my major professor there was David Pimentel, and he's a renowned scientist and has written many books on the interactions of humans and the environment, and is kind of one of those forward-thinking individuals. one of the things that I did when I first got there was he had run his, he was very famous for the genetic feedback theory, which is that as animals and plants evolve together, that there would be a stability that would occur as they evolve genetically. So he had the genetic feedback theory that if you feed on if you're an herbivore that feeds on a plant and the plant is evolving and the herbivore is evolving, methods of overcoming resistance in the herbivore and methods of resistance in the plant, that eventually you get stability. And he had shown some mathematical models that showed that that worked. And he had done that on a Burroughs computer back in the 50s. And when I got there, he asked me if I could program it into Fortran and put it in a newer computer program. I did that, and we got anti-genetic feedback. In other words, everything went to extinction. And so he actually hired 2 or 3 postdocs in mathematics to figure out what I had done wrong.
So what was your actual dissertation then? I mean,
it was on alfalfa weevils.
Okay.
And I was working on the economic injury levels of alfalfa weevils, which was a newly introduced pest into New York State and other areas where alfalfa was grown.
Great.
So it was a very important pest, and I was trying to figure out how many weevils a plant could take.
Cool. And so I think a very important thing happened here at Cornell. I believe you met your wife, right?
Yes,
Cornell.
I met my wife. Adele is not a singer. But she is a very nice person, and her family left Hungary right before the Russians moved in. So her mother and father and her brother were on the last train out of Hungary and were displaced persons in Austria just after World War II. And then they came over to the United States. She was born here, but her brother was born over in Hungary.
Is she from New York or?
She's from Ithaca, New York. So her father worked as a machinist for the physics department at Cornell. So her tuition was covered because in those days they allowed if they could get into Cornell, which she could, then she could go there and not have to pay tuition for her education. So she was in classics, ancient history.
Oh, that's great.
and was the best student in classics, which Cornell is famous for putting out very good people.
That's really fantastic. And so, Dr. Koehler, how did you meet her if she was on campus?
Okay, well, I had adopted a dog that was kind of cast off from the veterinary school, and so I had adopted a dog. I was out playing frisbee with it for lunch one day, and for whatever reason, rather than going and getting the frisbee, of all the people walking around the quad, which is the area between all the buildings where the classes are held, the dog ran over. She had gotten a new coat, and he jumped all over her coat and got it all muddy. Now, why her of all of the people out there?
Destiny.
Yeah, my dog selected my wife. He probably had better judgment than I would have had.
That's a great story.
But that's how we met, and that happened probably more than 50 years ago when we first met, and then we've been married 47 years now.
Congratulations. That's a great story. So now you finished at Cornell, and it looked like you moved to Florida, right? And joined the Navy.
Yeah, so basically I was going to be drafted by the Army. So I had 3 years that they were going to give me to finish my degree. So I finished my PhD at Cornell, and I was picked up as a medical entomologist in the Navy. So I was a lieutenant medical service corps, and stayed there from 72 to 75 at the Disease Vector Ecology and Control Center, which now is called the Navy Entomology Center of Excellence. And
Yep.
so it's grown over the years to be quite good.
Right.
Two of the people that I worked for, Captain Bill Hall,
Mhm.
uh, and and John Mulrennan Jr. Were mentors for me
That's
there,
great.
and they were great people. You maybe recognize the name Mulrennan because John Mulrennan Sr. eradicated mosquitoes from the eradicated malaria from the state of Florida.
Yeah.
So he got an honorary PhD, and I was there for his ceremony
Oh,
where he
that's
got
so
an honorary
fantastic.
PhD from the University of Florida
That's great.
for his work uh, in the late 40s. 47, I think, was the
Mhm.
last case of endemic malaria in the state.
Wow.
He received an honorary degree from UF for that.
Wow, that's
And then
wonderful.
John Mulrennan Jr. kind of followed in his dad's footsteps, and he was he was in the Navy
Mhm.
and was my boss and mentor for me while I was in the Navy. And then he went on to head up the Department of Health and later on the Department of Agriculture's regulation of mosquito districts and
Wow.
also pest control industry in the state.
That's incredible. That's great. And so in this position, what were your responsibilities? I know there are probably a lot of them, but what were the main things you did?
Well, the first thing that I was given was to be training officer, which meant that I was responsible for organizing and carrying out all the training activities in etymology at the center. So we would bring in 2-week reservists, and some of the reservists were quite accomplished people that they maybe were in charge of public health for like the state of Alabama or Michigan or wherever. And they'd come in for 2 weeks of training. And then I also did the 4-week courses. Courses were for people that were actually doing pest control on base. We also did training for the corpsmen who were responsible for pest control aboard ship.
Oh, wow.
So you don't think about it, but who does pest control aboard ship? It's usually falls in the hands of the medical department, which is the hospital corpsman is the one that has the sprayer and goes around the ship and does the treatments.
So what were the main issues on these ships?
Oh, the main issue was cockroaches, and it was all German cockroaches that were aboard ship. And I remember there was one ship that had a terrible cockroach problem. And we were doing sprays with chlorpyrifos and Dursban and Bagon propoxur back in those days. And it was very difficult to achieve control with the high humidity and the conditions that they had there. There was one ship that was really bad. I remember going into the kitchen area, and there's always a little slope to the deck so that the water, any water that is spilled goes down and can be pumped out. Well, if you stood still, you would hit the wall from sliding on the grease on the floor. I mean, it was terrible, and they weren't maintaining food only in the mess areas, messes where you eat food on the ship. They weren't holding the food there, so people were taking food to other parts of the ship. And this one sailor came up to me, and he said, "Do cockroaches bite?" And I said, "Well, they have mandibles that they can pinch your skin. They don't have a piercing sucking mouth part like a mosquito." He said, "That's not what I mean." I said, "Well, they have spines on their legs, and maybe when they crawl across you, it feels like they're biting you." He said, "That's not what I mean." He said, "Look at my eyes." And he didn't have any eyelashes because the roaches would eat him off at night while he was sleeping.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a terrible, so we had some massive infestations. And then it was even more difficult aboard submarines because the submarines, they close up and we couldn't use anything like Dursban or Propoxur on those
You don't think
ships.
about pest control on those types of, ships.
Yeah, what we used to do was DDVP fumigations, which was not really a fumigation, but it was, we would set off DDVP aerosols. And it was really hard aboard the nuclear subs because you have to have someone watching the reactor all the time. And so we had to give them gas masks and they could stay there. And it was really quite a different kind of pest control. I was one of the few people that was certified back then to do
That's incredible.
submarine fumigations. We had both diesel subs and nuclear subs back then. We were getting rid of the diesel sub fleet by giving them to the Taiwanese or or other navies that could use them. But they always wanted them cockroach free.
Yeah, for sure.
So we had to go in there. We were one of the last things that we did before the Chinese would take over.
Wow. So you were in the Navy then, so in this sort of role for about 3 years or so. You got married in 1974.
1974, I got married while I was in the Navy.
Yeah.
And Adele then moved. She had gotten her master's degree from SUNY Binghamton in art history.
Oh, nice.
So she went on in art history and got her master's degree, and that's when she graduated. And then she came down and joined me in Florida.
Great, that's fantastic. So from there, it looks like you stayed in Florida.
I stayed in Florida. I was fortunate enough to be hired by the University of Florida as an extension entomologist. Back in those days, we had extension entomologists that 100% of their job was extension work. These days, everybody gets a little bit of extension, but they don't get very much, maybe 5% or 10% of their job is extension. But back then we had what we called extension entomologists that did only extension work. And one of the things that I decided to do, because it hadn't been done in years, was to do demonstrations of things that we knew from science would work for our producers.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And back in those days, when I came to the University of Florida, they said that you have medical and veterinary entomology, and our livestock producers and poultry producers really need the assistance. The pest control industry really doesn't. They do their own thing. They do their own thing. And so I figured if I was going to get fired for anything, it was my lack of knowledge of medical and veterinary entomology. And I had been a TA for medical entomology when I was at Cornell, but it's a whole lot different when you come in, you're responsible for a program. So one of the first things that I did was I knew that the insecticide impregnated ear tags were quite effective for hornfly control on cattle. And I got with the folks over in the animal science department, and they had extension people there that were doing hormone implants that would increase weight gain. And what we could do is round the cattle up, do a hormone implant, put an insecticide impregnated ear tag in the ears of cattle, and be able to demonstrate greater growth than if they didn't do anything. So we were able to show a tremendous economic benefit in using the insecticide impregnated ear tags. The first chemical that was used was styrophos, which is Rabon, and no longer used anymore. They've gone on to mostly pyrethroids and other products in ear tags. Then I also worked with poultry producers, and the poultry producers are rather interesting. I remember I'd go out with a poultry scientist and we'd visit the farms, and the farms at that point were rented by the feed companies to put their chickens in, and the poultry producers were responsible for the manure and collecting the eggs, of course. But they had tremendous fly problems, and every once in a while they would have northern fowl mite problem. Well, they'd have northern fowl mite problems all the time. And I remember one time we had an outbreak of lice. And usually you didn't have chicken louse problems because they would change over their chickens fast enough that the lice wouldn't be a problem. But they started holding their chickens over another year, and they ended up with a tremendous louse problem. I went down to Tampa, and it eventually became one of those things that if you use common sense, that people aren't used to it. And the farmer there had told me nothing controls the lice, and he sprayed with everything that's legal, which would be 7 and malathion and permethrin. And he said none of that would kill the lice. So
And
I
they were
said-
just doing topical sprays?
They were spraying with a mechanical sprayer
Uh-huh.
up under the cages
Okay.
to spray the underside of the chicken. And he said he couldn't control the lice with any of the sprays that were available to him. So I said, why don't you I said, do you have 3 buckets, 5-gallon buckets? And I said, if you mix up the insecticide that you're using in each one of those, 7 and malathion and permethrin, what I can do is I can dunk the chickens and see if the lice live or not. And so I dunked the first chicken into malathion, brought it up, checked the lice were healthy. So the next chicken I dunked into 7, brought it up, the lice were healthy.
Mm.
The third bucket for permethrin, I dunked it in and the lice all died.
It's just the application method.
And it was just the
Makes
application.
sense, right?
Yeah, so I could tell him, your spraying method is not getting it to where the lice are.
Yeah.
And northern fowl mite is very susceptible to permethrin, and nothing would control them. What would happen would be they were picking eggs by hand then from the chicken coops, and the mites would crawl up their arms, and it was mostly women that were doing that. Then they'd get under their bras and cause a tremendous amount of irritation. So it was a bad situation.
For sure.
But permethrin solved that northern fowl mite problem for a long time.
That's fantastic.
It's a hot product on mites.
Wow.
And then about the same time, the first fire ant baits came on the market. So Amdro was something that we could set up demonstrations with the ranchers to try to control fire ants on their property. I went out to one of the farms and the rancher there said, I just about died last week from the fire ants. I said, well, how did that happen? He said, well, I was fencing with barbed wire, and I stepped in a fire ant mound while I was pulling the wire, and I started jumping up and down, got all tangled up in the barbed wire. And he said, I just about died because I couldn't get away. And so it was a terrible situation.
Wow. I'm glad you were working on that.
Yeah, so those 3 things were some of the things that I took on in my first years, 1975 to 1982.
And it was all extension, so you didn't have any students, or did you have students at that time?
I had no students at that point. No.
Okay.
No, I didn't have any students then.
And so then in 1982.
1982. Dick Patterson, who was a researcher at USDA, he took over the household insect research, and he asked me if I could do a sabbatical to try to help get it back on track.
So Dr. Koehler, did you pick a really great spot for your sabbatical?
It was right there in Gainesville, so it was a quarter of a mile away from where I was.
But it turned out to be pretty good.
And so I went to my department chair and I said, can I do a sabbatical over at the USDA? And he said, you usually leave and go somewhere else for a sabbatical. If you want to do something over at the USDA, just do a job relocation. I said, I've never heard of a job relocation. What is that? He said, well, you just go to work over there. So I went over there in 1982 with Dick Patterson, and no one ever told me to go back to the university, so I stayed for 13 years.
That's awesome.
And because I was at the USDA, and we were doing some high visibility research that was picked up by like the Today Show and other places. It was kind of interesting because there were like 3 or 4 congressional investigations of me impersonating a USDA scientist, and I'd always respond, who wants to be a meat inspector? But they do more than meat inspections. But anyway, they were thinking that I was impersonating a USDA scientist, but it was just because I was a visiting University of Florida professor at a USDA lab.
And their lab. That's fantastic. And so there you worked with cockroaches and.
Yeah, I worked with cockroaches and fleas and integrated pest management. So basically, with the cockroaches, it turned out that Zoicon had gotten with us and said, we have this growth regulator, which we think would be useful in cockroach control. And it was right in the early days. Bill Bowers, who was one of the first researchers who had synthesized some of the products, he and I would go around and talk to the pest control industry about it. But we set up experiments with public housing in order to demonstrate whether it would work or not. Now, what happened is when we were at the first IGR symposium that was held in Dallas, what happened was that every other research group could not demonstrate that the insect growth regulators worked. Me and my ignorance in setting these things up, we found that it worked very well. After about 6 months, the cockroaches were sterilized by exposure to hydroprene. And then the old died off and weren't replaced with young because of the sterility in the population. But the thing that we did that was different was that if we had a group of apartments under one roof, we treated them all the same. And other researchers did everything like they always had. And I was new to it, so I didn't know. They would randomize their apartments. So you would have treated apartments next to untreated apartments. And John Owens back then up at Purdue, for his PhD, showed that there can be 25% migration of cockroaches between apartments. It just didn't, the growth regulators didn't have a chance of working in that kind of situation where they were moving between apartments. If we treated everything under one roof the same, then it worked. And so we were able, they were going to discontinue their development for cockroaches, except for the data that we had that others could then confirm later on.
Did you find that the pest control industry or pest management industry at the time really was hesitant to move towards cockroach baiting, or do you think it was relatively easily adopted?
Well, the growth regulators are spray formulation.
Spray, okay.
But then we got into some of the cockroach baits early on with Shulton, which had the first baits that eventually became the combat line. And they sent them down to us to evaluate. We did all of that in low-income public housing as well. And the cockroach baits we found were very effective, but the industry did not do baiting. They did spraying. The way that we taught people to do it was you go into a room with a B&G sprayer, hand compressed air sprayer, and you walk for a right-handed person, you walk counterclockwise around the room and you spray all the floorboards. That's the way that you did it back in those days. And baiting was entirely different, where you go in there and try to use a syringe to inject the gel baits back into cracks or crevices, or use a hockey puck kind of bait station to put out in different places. So it was a long sell for the industry. We probably started working in 1982 with the cockroach baits, and it wasn't until almost the mid 1990s that the industry really adopted baits as a significant part of their program.
That's great. So I think you were also working with cat fleas, right? In school IPM, sort of.
Yeah, so I did cat fleas, and actually on the right-hand side of the screen in that jar, I have the world's largest collection of cat flea pupae.
I have to say, I think I saw that before in person.
500,000 cat flea pupae that are in that jar. And when I first went over to the USDA, they were producing Oriental rat flea, which is the main vector of plague in the world, but not exactly a significant problem in Florida and the southeastern United States. So I decided we should get into cat fleas, which is the prime pest on both cats and dogs in most of the world, and especially in the United States. So that's the primary flea that's the problem. The thing that I found out, and again, in my ignorance, I didn't realize that the most cat fleas that had ever been produced was 300 fleas in a month. And you can't
Hard
do a
to
whole
do
lot of
research with that.
research when you don't have the animal that you're supposed to be dealing with. Out in people's houses, they can produce thousands, but in the lab, nobody had ever figured out how to mass produce. And we eventually figured that out, and we mass produced the fleas. We were doing 60,000 fleas a week off of 12 cats. We could do artificial rearing, but it was easier to do the cats, and they were much more productive. We had one cat that, when Nancy Hinkle was a student with me, she was assigned the task of organizing the students to do shifts on a 24-hour basis, and we had Dumpster producing 10,000 fleas and flea eggs in one day. So
Incredible.
You know, there are sloppy cats and there are fastidious cats that keep themselves clean because they have recurved hairs on their tongue that they can remove fleas with. Well, with Dumpster, didn't do much flea removal, but it certainly could produce a lot of fleas in a short period of time.
So is this when you really began to love cats, or,
Oh,
or
definitely.
did you love cats
we
before?
had one cat that we called Fang. And Fang did not like anybody.
Oh,
But, we actually had a technician assigned.
Oh, sure.
Dick Patterson was a great mentor. He assigned one technician to petting cats.
Yeah, I mean, we're joking
So
around.
they were very well cared for.
Oh, absolutely. I know we're joking about
But
it.
Fang didn't like anybody, and Fang gave cat scratch fever to 2 of my students. And so I started making jokes about cats.
And that's when it started then.
And what's interesting is when we were able to mass produce fleas, we could teach other people how to do it that were in industry. And so that's where the on-animal treatments came on right after that they could determine that their products worked. Until then, they really couldn't definitively say that they worked. And so the first one that came on was in 1990, just after we had finished our ability to be able to do mass production of cat fleas. Advantage came on, they sold $92 million worth of it the first year. Frontline came on and did gangbusters. Now they say a new flea control product is worth about $1 billion a year. So it's a huge part of the veterinary industry.
Oh, absolutely revolutionary.
One other thing that we did was that we did school IPM.
Right.
And so I have there the IPM cleaner solution on the right, which is nothing more than soapy water. We would give students an empty bottle that were living in married student housing on campus. We would give them an empty bottle, tell them to put dishwashing soap in it and shake it up and then be able to spray their pests with soapy water. And, we have a video where we can show houseflies going down as soon as they're hit with the soapy water. And actually bees will go down when you use 5% soapy water. That's a great way to save someone from a bee attack. And,
you're right.
And we were able to advocate the use of soap for some of these IPM situations.
Great.
And you don't think about it, but in schools, you have children in the same class that have parents that say that their kids shouldn't be exposed to toxic pesticides in the same class where parents are expecting good pest control. So it was a real dilemma that we were able to overcome through the use of just common sense.
That's great. I know you guys have, your laboratory and others at University of Florida have done so much really for IPM in schools and really advancing that. And then I think so by this time you already have students, right? With the fleas, Dr. Hinkle, I believe.
Yes,
Dr.
and
Hinkle
Dan Suter with the cockroaches. We had Richard Kramer who was working with cockroaches.
Right.
So it was a long line of students. And I really didn't have my first students until the late 1980s.
Okay.
So I was there for about 15 years before I started taking on students, because in extension, you didn't have when I came on in extension, they gave me a telephone and a camera. And an office to sit in, and that's what we were supposed to do our work with.
And so then I think you started working with termiticides, correct?
Yes, and what happened then was, and I have a picture of Roberto and me there by the urban entomology building. Back in back in 1995, I had moved back to the University of Florida campus. Well, the USDA was having to do asbestos removal in the whole laboratory building I was located in. They said they didn't have room for me, let alone their own scientists. So they said, you're going to have to leave. So I went to Dr. Caponera, who was the department chairman back then, and I said, when are you going to give me a lab to work in? He never thought I would leave the USDA because it was such a great working environment for me. But his response to me when I said, when are you going to give me a lab? He said, never, go build your own laboratory. So that was a challenge. That was a challenge to build my own lab. So that's where the urban entomology building came from. We got donations from both S.E. Johnson and Sumitomo in order to be able to get the funding to build the laboratory. And in 1995, we moved in. We did not have facilities to maintain the cats according to IACUC, which is the Institutional Animal Use and Care Committee for the University of Florida. So I said, okay, I'm getting out of fleas and I'm going into termites. And so one of the first things that I took on with both Jerry Galoff, who is now with Rollins.
That's right.
Is Rollins, I guess. And Tommy Powell, was to take a look at repellent versus non-repellent termiticides because we were having such so many failures with the termiticide applications in the state. And we were getting 25% of the houses built in the early 90s. Before they were 5 years old, they would have termites. So we felt we had to find out what was wrong. And what we found was that if you used a repellent termiticide and weren't thorough with your treatments, that the termites could find the gap in the treatment. I have a repellent there on the left-hand side. That 102 days later, even though about a third of the dish is treated with termiticide, the termites are still alive 3 months later, more than 3 months later. As opposed to a non-repellent where they tunnel into it, they contact the insecticide and then die. So there was a definite difference between those. And I gave the first talk on repellent versus non-repellent termiticides in Orlando at an FDMA meeting. And I remember the repellent termiticide manufacturers faced the walls. And the only non-repellent back then was imidacloprid, which was a Bayer product. And Ron Palak had fipronil back then, and it eventually became a really good termiticide. They said, we think we have a product that you might like to look at. And so we did, and we did the first airborne insecticide work with fipronil to show that it was safe to use for household treatments without getting a lot of the insecticide into the air, but it also worked to control the termites. So we did that initial work to be able to get registration with them on fipronil.
Interesting.
And we promoted the non-repellents as a more forgiving way to be able to do termite treatments.
That's incredible. I mean, I think it's so important. I think we sometimes forget how important these applied research projects are for the industry, right? That's supporting positions like yours, or even with us, right, at the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, and I found out that a lot of this is common sense.
Somebody's got to put some kinds of common sense together.
Sometimes
right?
there's a lack there, but also it's the people around you that are very important to be able to bring everything into perspective, because everybody comes from their own background.
Sure.
And when I look at the people that I've been associated with, it's just tremendous the number of people that have contributed to all of this.
Right. That's wonderful. So you did all that work and really, I mean, it's continued really until today with all the applied research. But over at University of Florida, you also started their urban pest management program.
Yes, and so it's rather interesting that when I was hired on, I was 100% extension. Then I became very heavily involved with research and extension. And then in moving back to the university, I had a greater emphasis on student education. And I always felt that the pest control industry was at a point where they had to make a choice whether they were going to hire someone that had a business background or someone that had an entomology background for personnel that they would bring into their business. I didn't see any reason why we couldn't do both.
Yeah.
So we put together an urban pest management curriculum that the first time I proposed it to our faculty, it was voted down. And we never put it up to the faculty vote again.
And it's been a very successful program,
And
right?
our undergraduate coordinator back then, when he came up to me one day and he said, "You need to do the urban pest management curriculum." And I said, "Well, it was voted down." He said, "Just do it." So we did. And so we did a combination of business and a combination of science. And what I found out is that the students that do well in science don't necessarily do well in business and vice versa.
Right.
They're kind of incompatible.
Right.
But if we kept them in the College of Agriculture with their business, they did really well. So we were able to adapt the curriculum over the years to meet the needs.
Do you know how many students, undergrads, have gone through that program? I mean, I don't know if you know or not, but
No,
but it's got to be thousands.
I don't think they've ever kept a record of that. I've
record?
never seen a number, but we've had some very successful students go through that have done very well. And the idea was to prepare the students for getting into the professional pest management industry.
Very good.
And as part of that program, we give them an internship so they get practical experience. And then in the state of Florida, they can take the exams along with their graduation.
That's great.
So they can qualify to take the state exams. And that's something that we had to change the law also because they were requiring 3 years of employment.
That's right.
And if we gave them experience as part of their education, then they could go directly into the industry and take the state exams for certification.
Boy, that's really fantastic.
And as a result of that, we have many scholarships for our undergraduates that are specific for urban pest management. And so we encourage the students to get into that because we have support for them.
Yeah, that's great.
I have pictured there on the right-hand side, Corey G is with McCall Service and is in charge of their training. He's one that went through the undergraduate program, got his bachelor's degree, is very happy working with McCall's and is in charge of their technical. In the center holding the plaque is John Cooksey, who was one of the owners of McCall Service, and he got his master's degree with me. He did his undergraduate in chemistry at FSU, and I told him that he finally decided to get a real education by coming to the University of Florida. I just joke with him about that. And then his brother there, Brian Cooksey, between him and Corey G, he has been president of NPMA and has been a leader in the pest management industry for years. And then David Cooksey on the left, he died recently. He was supposed to be inducted. It was a tragic thing that happened with a medical operation that he had that he died rather suddenly, and so he was going to be president of FPMA in Florida. So that was very sad.
Well, I know you have had a lot of students. Somewhere in the range of 80, 88 plus, right? That's an incredible number of students for any, major professor.
That's just graduate students.
That's graduate students, yeah. Then not even
also
counting
had
the
a number of
undergrads,
students,
right, that have gone through.
So yeah, I've had 88 graduate students, according to the records at the University of Florida.
That's amazing, right? And again, look,
and most of them have gone on in the pest control education or research or somewhere in the industry.
And have done very well, right? I mean, you have a few listed. I know there's too many to list.
I know that it's really hard because anytime that you start listing, you forget somebody.
Of course.
And there's someone who feels left out.
Mhm.
But anyway, Nancy Hinkle is one there that's with
Yeah.
the chicken. I think I mentioned her earlier,
Yes.
where she did the work with the cat fleas.
Yeah,
Dan Suter,
of course.
both he and Nancy are at the University of Georgia
Uh-huh.
and are professors there. So they've done very well in their academic careers and are continuing to train students
Yeah.
in entomology. Then Deanie Miller in the center.
Mhm.
She has continued on with a lot of the work in public housing
Yes.
that she is well recognized for helping out, especially with bed bug problems in public housing. But not only that, she's worked with them with cockroaches, and she recently got one of the big awards from public housing for her dedication to helping out their residents. Then Richard Kramer was my first PhD student that I chaired. Now, um, Jerry Hogsett, who is a USDA scientist and one of the world's authorities on fly control, he says that he's my first student, but I was not. I was not chair of his committee. I was just on his committee. So Richard Kramer was in the Army and was an Army colonel, retired, went with American Pest Control up in Washington, D.C. for a while, then started his own company up there in Maryland. Has sold it off recently for a large sum of money and has retired and started up a new pest control company in Florida now. So he's still involved with the industry. And then Brittany Campbell is one of the newer ones out there. She was with NPMA until just the other day. Now she's with Control Solutions with about 3 or 4 of my other graduates that are there at Control Solutions. So somehow they cornered the market on that. And one thing I need to mention is that we have been involved with training a lot of the medical entomologists in the Navy and even in the Army to some extent. And I have there Joe DeClaro, who was commissioned at that point. He got his PhD with me at the University of Florida. That was his commissioning. And on the right-hand side is Captain Breeden, who came down, is a very accomplished military entomologist.
Absolutely.
And actually, for his commissioning, the Surgeon General of the Navy came down for Joe's commissioning.
Wow.
So it was quite an event for them to have him go through and get his PhD with us.
Wonderful. Yeah, and then I think there's a few more. Ben Hoddle up there as well. And,
Ben Hoddle is with Orkin in their technical department now. He was at Florida A&M as a professor there, but
just recently moved to.
He recently
Oregon.
moved to Oregon, and then Holly Beard has also stayed with us over the years too. So she's in industry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to tell my story, graduate student story with you. So many people maybe on this, webinar don't know that I am too a grad of University of Florida. I got my PhD there.
I can't believe you survived me.
Well, really, I almost feel like you're my advisor. You're actually like my step advisor. So my degree is in nematology, but the way the entomology nematology building was set up was we were on your side, right? Towards the back of the building. So Dr. Dixon was my advisor, but you were always up and down walking. Plus, I was fortunate to interact a lot with some of your graduate students from Clay Scherer and Deanie Miller. We were there all at the same time. So one of the things that I always noticed, even though I wasn't in entomology, I was doing nematological work, just how involved you were with any graduate student that wanted to get involved with ENSO or, student government or just chat, and even setting up interviews for students for prospective jobs. And I'm going to have to tell the story, right? Because it's a good one.
Go ahead.
And so you had set up an interview for students and put me on the list because it was getting time where I was getting close to graduating. And so everything was all set up. And I think at the time it was with Dow AgroSciences, right? Ellen Toms and I forget who else was coming in at that time to do the interviews. Well, I was out in the field working, doing my research. And frankly, I kind of forgot, right? So here I am, I pull into the back of the building and I'm wearing cutoff shorts and a visor. You know, my nails are disgustingly dirty. And you come out in the parking lot and you're like, you're next. You're not, you know, like, oh, I can't go in this way. And you basically said, you're going in. So I have to tell you, it was actually a good interview, right? It all kind of worked out. But
well, they liked it that you were a worker.
They did. I guess they did, you know, but it was, to me, that is the funny story that I'm always going to be very grateful and thankful for you to do that. And really, you know, even after graduating, you maintained so much contact with so many of your students. And though I wasn't directly your students, I am your step student. I am incredibly grateful, you know, to everything that you've done these 22 years since I've graduated.
Well, you've done a lot for us, and actually a lot of our graduates have done a lot for our program at the University of Florida.
So we always tend to go home, I think, right, to the University of Florida.
One of the things I always did was I always told students I had an opportunity for them.
Right. You got to.
And it may not have been what they wanted to do at exactly that point in time, but it worked out for their benefit in the end.
Yeah.
And many of those opportunities were times when they could speak to industry.
Sure.
They can hone some of their skills in communication, and I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah, very much.
And I remember Nancy Hinkle, the first day that she started, I had her on a live radio show on flea control.
Well, it really.
She hadn't started their flea control project yet.
Just do it. But, you know, I think a lot of, you know, what a lot of your students are, you know, great speakers. And, you know, and I really think that is a direct, because I saw it, is you putting them in front of the pest control industry and doing extension and outreach. And I think it's so important for students to get out into the public, right, and communicate.
Yeah, I find it disappointing that many of the professors have the attitude that a student comes in, you put them in a laboratory, close the door, and then 3 or 4 years later, they come out with a degree.
You really need to get out there, and I think it's wonderful service that you've done. And I think, you know, the other thing that we didn't really touch on are all the postdocs and visiting scientists and everybody really that has gone through your laboratory.
Yeah, we've had a number of people that have been either postdocs or visiting scientists from other countries that we actually have had an impact worldwide, even though I don't like international travel and don't go on it all that often, and none anymore.
Right.
But it's very nice to see how we've had an influence in other countries as well.
I know you've had the opportunity to work on a lot of different projects that actually have seen a product go to market, right? Patents and being issued and even going into the retail.
Yeah, I think the last time I looked, I had something like 28 patents. Most of them are losers, and I'm not waiting to get wealthy on any of them. But the most recent ones are on mosquitoes and flies.
Right.
And the Insecto company was formed to commercialize those, and Enrico Levy is the CEO of the company, is Italian and lives in Italy, and formed the company. And the University of Florida licensed the patents for mosquitoes and fly products to his company, and he's now in a situation where he has registration for some of these products in the U.S. and in Europe. So he has financial backing for them from some venture capital folks who have put enough money in to get them off the ground. And the mosquito products and the fly products are now available in the U.S. And what's interesting about the licensing agreement that they have with Insecto is the University of Florida owns shares in the stock. So whatever they sell goes back into, some of it goes back into the education of the students. Great. And it's a really nice working relationship that we have there. I don't have a part in the company at all. I just am one of the inventors, and the university owns the inventions.
That's right. But it's nice to see, you know, some of these ideas actually, you know, go out on the market. So I think, you know, one of the things that's so important, I think, for me to mention is that if there's an award in the pest industry, field, I think it's important. I do want to mention now the ant guard of the hummingbird feeders.
Yeah, back when I was there with Dick Patterson, he and I worked on the ant guard for hummingbird feeders, and it's basically an insecticide impregnated ear tag inside that device where the ants have to crawl over the insecticide. And since it's a pyrethroid, it's repellent to them, so they don't crawl across it. And that protects a hummingbird feeder from ants. They're it is now sold commercially by Perky Pet.
Okay.
And we were both Dick and I were involved in the development of that particular product.
That's neat. Yeah, that's really neat. I'll have to go check out our box store. Is that where we know? I think with Perky Pet, I think that's where you find those, right?
Yeah, that's right. Perky Pet sells them. So the CEO of the company was elderly and died, and before he died, he sold off the thing that was commercialized, which was the ant guard product.
Wow. And so, Dr. Koehler, as I was just mentioning, I think if there is an award, honestly, in this field, I believe you have received it. So,
well, it should have been probably the people that worked with me that received it.
But I mean, you have received over your career so many honors, from the University of Florida to the states, to the national level, international level. These are just a few that are listed, for, of course, the Entomological Society as well. Those are all very, very important. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, let me tell you at least one, that Margie and Dempsey Sapp were the founders of Florida Pest Control and Chemical Company. And back in the late 1990s, Dempsey came up to me at a breakfast in Orlando that FPMA was holding, and he said, "Can you stay around after breakfast and talk to me?" Well, he hadn't talked to me in 20 years. I actually asked people, does he not like me? Because they say, well, he doesn't talk to anybody until he knows them for 20 years. And so I stayed after breakfast, and he said, "How much would it cost for me to endow a professorship for you?" I said, "I have no idea, probably $1 million. And he said, "I'll do it."
Wow,
so those were the first words that he spoke to me. and they were, about a month later, he said, "Can you go to lunch with me?" And he said, "I talked to my accountant, and I don't know how to tell you this, but he said, I wanted to write a check for $1 million, but my accountant said it would be better if I wrote a check for 500,000. My wife wrote a check for 500,000. He said, "Is that okay with you? Because I told you I was going to write one check for $1 million."
I think you're okay with that.
I said, "Yeah, you're fine with that." So actually, he wrote a check for 500,000, and because of matching funds, it was worth another $750,000 for them to do one more dollar.
Wow.
Which Margie then wrote a check for $501 to beat Dempsey out. And so that's where the Margie and Dempsey Sapp endowment came from. And of course, the Florida Pest Management Association endowment as well was with me. And I've been an honorary member of the Florida Pest Management Association since 1982. And that was really in recognition of finding the Formosan termite infestations in Florida for the first time. And I was inducted into the UF Academy of Teaching Excellence, which is rather interesting because I'm 100% extension, right? That's what I was hired to do. But eventually, over the years, that was eroded by other responsibilities. And then just the other year, I was made a fellow in the Entomological Society of America, and also a fellow in the National Academy of Inventors, which is kind of something new for me to think about.
Yeah, but this is fantastic. I mean, with all these different ideas and just contributions, it's been great. I mean, the awards don't stop, right? And some of these are doozies. They're big and, just incredible awards.
Yeah, one of the big ones is a little plaque that we got in the center. Dick Patterson said, for that Dickie plaque, that's the biggest award that we've ever gotten at the USDA lab in Gainesville. And it was a Federal Laboratories Consortium Award for Technology Transfer. And that's all the federal laboratories for all of the different
That's incredible.
federal agencies that, worldwide. So,
congratulations on that. That's what year was that? Do you remember?
I think it was 1987.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
When I was still over at the USDA when we got that. And then I've had a couple of USDA outstanding service, and here I have one picture to Superior Service Award. I had to go to DC and meet all of our legislators to be showed off by the deans as being somebody that did some kind of achievement.
And then the University of Florida distinguished faculty, right? There's only 3 professors a year, I think.
Yeah, I think it's either 3 or 4. I can't remember.
Right.
Maybe they've even changed them over the
And
years.
a lot of faculty members.
I had to ride in the front of the homecoming parade in a convertible and go over to the president's house for receiving this.
Did you throw beads? Did you throw beads out to the? You don't do that in Florida.
No, we don't do that in Florida. No, you just sit there and wave and you say hello to everyone along the route. It was interesting that that I would get that because there are like 4,000 faculty that they have to choose from, and why me? I don't know.
What an honor.
I think Clay Shearer was behind some of that because
wonderful.
Because they had a nice big banquet. And I remember Marie
Knox, yes.
Marie Knox was with me at the banquet, and on the way out towards the parking garage, this guy came over and he said to Marie, "Are you the lady that has the picture of a roach on her face?" When she was a freshman, she put a roach on her face and let a photographer take a picture of it, and you can still see that on the web if you look roach on face with a Google search, that'll come up. So she became famous as a freshman for having done that in my lab. So that was an opportunity for her.
For sure. And she's also a nematologist by training, huh?
I must admit, without all of the good people that I've been associated with over the years, including yourself and many others, that none of those awards would have come to me. And I certainly don't feel like I achieved them. I think that it's something that we all achieved together.
It's very nice to hear. And this is the one quality I think I always take back from you, is that you're so appreciative of all the folks, the people that are around, right? That are all working together and really.
Well, it's a truth. Yeah. It's a truth.
Yeah.
And I know that when my father saw me going into biology, he said, "Why would you want to go into science? You want to do something to help people." Eventually, when he saw what I was doing with the public housing and that sort of thing, he goes, "Oh, I understand now why you're doing this, because you're there to help people."
It's so important. So, just sort of to wrap up here, I think we've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes, right? Which is wonderful. It's gone by so quickly, but at this point, you retired in July 1st of 2020. I think everyone, the whole industry was sort of reverberating, like, is this really happening? He's retiring? What? Right?
Well, it was a paperwork retirement. And the only thing that I got out of the retirement was I don't have to fill out all of the forms and paperwork that I did before I retired.
Right.
The things that was just checking off boxes for the university somewhere. I still go into work every day. I still have an office there. I still have my same email and phone number, and so I'm still able to interact with the students. I've relocated to the main building now, so I can be more involved with outreach and student recruitment into our department. So I've been very happy with retirement and being able to stay active. I did not. I always said I wanted it to be a non-retirement.
Look, I mean, actually, I didn't even notice the difference. I think for many people who don't know, I think you should have an honorary office in this building here in New Orleans with all the many years of work that our agency has done with you and the University of Florida. So there was a time, I think you were coming over here quarterly, right? For different
Yeah.
projects.
And hopefully that continues.
Absolutely. No, absolutely continues and vice versa. So I think your official title now is Emeritus Distinguished Professor.
Yes.
Right. So and we put your contact information on the screen if somebody wants to reach out to you or send you an email.
Happy to talk with folks and help them out if I can.
Absolutely. So I'm really happy that you got out of radiological physics, right? And entered entomology. I think everyone else.
I did not enjoy that at all. I mean, it was, and most people don't know this, but usually you take the chemistry series like General Chem and Biochem and eventually you end up with PChem and then all the physics to support all of that. I went through all of that.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I know.
And I did not enjoy any of it.
Look, nobody wants to sit down with you at the board and say, hey, do that calculation, okay? Been there, so I know.
That's right.
So anyway, so look, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come over here. I know you came over from Florida to New Orleans, but this has been really a treat. I know for me, I absolutely, enjoy working with you and so much that you've done for me. And we're going to continue to work together.
I apologize for the names of all the people that I've missed.
It's hard. They'll understand, right? They'll understand. So I think we're going to open it up. I don't know if there are any questions that anybody has put on the chat. This is a great opportunity if you want to ask some questions or possibly even tell a little story here. I think we do have a hands up. So Astacia, she's in the command center in the back. Let's see if I can open up the chat. She might mention something. I don't know if we do or not. I can't really see.
No, there are no questions. Just a few comments, but no questions.
Okay, so I don't know if there's any comments that you want to mention, or I think they're all good. Okay, well, with that, Dr. Koehler, thank you so much again for taking the time and appreciate it. And we look forward.
No, thank you for having me. And I hope it showcases what's gone on at the University of Florida for the past 40 some years.
Absolutely. And everyone on the line, our next speaker is going to actually be Dr. Bobby Corrigan. So he's coming up in about a month or so.
Choice.
And we also have Dr. Frischman in the series. So we're super excited.
Both are fantastic.
Fantastic. I know. I'm so excited. And everyone, thanks so much and have a great day. Bye.